September 19th, 1944. Morning fog lay thick across the French countryside near Arracourt, Lorraine. Staff Sergeant William Denton crouched inside the turret of his M4 Sherman 76mm gun variant, watching the mist through his periscope. His loader, Corporal James Hartley, stood beside the breech, hands resting on a single gleaming shell in the ready rack. Not the standard armor-piercing round, not high explosive, the tungsten-cored hypervelocity armor-piercing round, designated M93, one of only 3 they carried. The Doctrine had been clear for months, high explosive first. The Sherman was an infantry support vehicle. Its primary mission remained destroying fortifications, suppressing enemy positions, engaging soft targets. Armor-piercing rounds stayed deeper in the stowage bins, retrieved only when enemy tanks appeared. That morning, Hartley had loaded the HVAP round first, against orders, against doctrine, against everything they had been taught. In the pre-dawn darkness, before the company moved out from their assembly area near Bézange-la-Petite, Hartley had asked the question that had been troubling him for weeks. "Sarge, if we run into Panthers, and we load HE first, like the manual says, how long do I have before that Panther puts a round through our front plate?" Denton had not answered immediately. The mathematics were simple and brutal. A Panther could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor from 2,000 meters. The Sherman's standard 76mm armor-piercing round could not penetrate the Panther's glacis plate at any range. Even against the turret mantlet, effective range was 100 meters or less, 100 meters, point-blank distance where a single German shot would end them all. "Load the HVAP first," Denton had said quietly. "If command asks, I gave the order." Now, as the fog began to lift, revealing the open agricultural land around Arracourt, that decision carried weight beyond a single crew, a single tank. Across Third Army's front, in every 76mm Sherman that had received the scarce tungsten rounds, loaders faced the same calculation: follow doctrine designed for a different war, or adapt to the reality of German heavy armor. The radio crackled. German tank movement reported east of Moncourt. Strength unknown. The 37th Tank Battalion, Combat Command A, 4th Armoured Division, moved forward into the thinning fog. Denton's Sherman was not alone. His platoon comprised 5 tanks. The battalion fielded 3 companies. Behind them stood the combined weight of Patton's Third Army, fuel-starved but determined, pushing toward the German border. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. But ahead, in the mist, lay something else. 5th Panzer Army. 2 Panzer brigades, fresh from refitting, equipped primarily with Panther tanks, whose long 75mm guns and sloped armor represented the most formidable opponent American tankers had yet faced in significant numbers. The Germans possessed local superiority, more tanks, better tanks, the technological advantage that should have guaranteed victory. The fog lifted further. Through the periscope, Denton saw movement, dark shapes materializing from the grey morning, low silhouettes, the distinctive profile of the Panther's sloped glacis plate. His gunner, Corporal Vincent Mills, had already identified the target. Panther, 11 o'clock, range estimated 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters. Beyond the effective range of standard ammunition, within the lethal range of the Panther's gun, Hartley's hand rested on the HVAP round in the breech. The first round loaded, the round that could penetrate the Panther's turret mantlet at this distance. The round they had been told to save, to preserve, to use only after exhausting standard ammunition. The decision to load HVAP first represented more than tactical adaptation. It embodied a complete reversal of American tank doctrine, made not by generals or ordnance departments, but by crews who understood that following the manual meant dying in the first exchange. What the Army would later recognize as a strategic necessity, these men had already determined through the brutal arithmetic of survival. The development of American tank doctrine in 1944 reflected assumptions formed during earlier campaigns. In North Africa, from 1942 through 1943, The M4 Sherman, with its 75mm gun, had proven adequate against German armor. The Panzer III and early Panzer IV variants could be engaged effectively at normal combat ranges. The Sherman's reliability, mechanical endurance, and high explosive capability made it an effective combined arms platform. Army Ground Forces Doctrine emphasized this multi-role capability. Tanks supported infantry, exploited breakthroughs, provided mobile firepower. Tank destroyers, with their more powerful guns, handled enemy armor. This division of labor appeared sound. General Leslie McNair, commanding Army Ground Forces until 1944, had institutionalized the concept. Tank destroyers existed specifically to destroy tanks. Medium tanks, like the Sherman, operated in a different role. When the 76mm gun entered production in January 1944, it represented an incremental improvement, not a doctrinal revolution. The gun offered better armor penetration than the 75mm, but ordnance testing emphasized its limitations. The high explosive round contained less filler than the 75mm shell. The muzzle blast obscured the gunner's view. Initial batches lacked muzzle brakes, compounding the problem. More significantly, Doctrine dictated ammunition loading priorities that reflected the Sherman's primary mission. Technical. Manual 9-1731B, published in 1943, specified ammunition handling procedures. High explosive rounds occupied the ready rack, immediately accessible to the loader. Armor-piercing rounds stayed in the hull storage bins. When enemy tanks appeared, the loader would extract AP rounds from storage and load them. The sequence made sense for infantry support operations. It made no sense against Panthers. The Panther tank, designated Panzerkampfwagen V, entered German service in mid-1943. By Normandy, it comprised 38% of German armor in the theatre. The Panther mounted a 75mm Kai K-42L70 gun, long-barreled and high velocity. Its muzzle velocity exceeded 2,900 feet per second. The gun could penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor from ranges beyond 2,000 meters. The Panther's own armor, particularly the glacis plate, sloped at 55 degrees with 80mm thickness, provided effective protection equivalent to 140mm of vertical armor. The Sherman's standard 76mm armor-piercing round, designated M62, could not penetrate this glacis at any range. American tank crews discovered this reality during the Normandy campaign. On July 2, 1944, General Eisenhower relayed urgent complaints to the Ordnance Department. The 76mm gun, promised as adequate against all German armor, could not defeat Panthers frontally. A board convened on July 12 to examine available weapons. The findings were sobering. No American tank gun in production could reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. Side and rear shots offered the only practical engagement geometry. This meant flanking maneuvers, close approaches, accepting casualties to achieve firing positions where American guns could be effective. The development of hypervelocity armor-piercing ammunition began as a response to this crisis. The T4 round, later standardized as M93, incorporated a tungsten carbide penetrator surrounded by an aluminum body and ballistic windshield. The lightweight sabot increased muzzle velocity to 3,400 feet per second. This velocity translated to dramatically improved penetration. Against the Panther's turret mantlet, HVAP could achieve penetration at ranges between 800 and 1,000 yards versus 100 yards for standard ammunition. Against the Tiger's frontal armor, HVAP offered capability where standard rounds failed completely. But tungsten production faced severe constraints. Strategic materials allocation prioritized other weapons systems. The first HVAP rounds reached France in August 1944, air-delivered to ensure rapid deployment. Total production remained limited to approximately 18,000 rounds. Priority allocation went to tank destroyer units. Sherman tank battalions received minimal quantities. Most tanks carried between 3 and 5 HVAP rounds. Some units received none. This scarcity created a psychological and tactical problem. Crews possessed a weapon that could defeat German heavy armor at reasonable combat ranges, but only for a handful of shots. Doctrine, written before HVAP existed, provided no guidance on employment. The assumption underlying standard loading procedures, that all ammunition types offered roughly equivalent effectiveness, no longer applied, yet official doctrine remained unchanged. Load high explosive first. Engage infantry and fortifications. Switch to armor piercing when enemy tanks appear. The intellectual framework supporting this doctrine rested on reasonable foundations. American military planning emphasized combined arms coordination. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air power operated in integrated fashion. No single element bore sole responsibility for any mission. When enemy tanks appeared, the doctrinal response involved multiple assets. Tank destroyers, equipped with more powerful guns and deployed specifically for anti-armor missions, engaged heavy targets. Artillery provided suppressive fire. Air support, increasingly dominant by late 1944, interdicted enemy movements. Medium tanks like the Sherman continued their primary mission of infantry support and exploitation. This framework had proven effective in North Africa and Italy. German armor in those theatres, while tactically proficient, appeared in limited numbers. Panzer III and Panzer IV variants, though formidable, could be engaged by Sherman guns at reasonable ranges. The Tiger I, though nearly invulnerable frontally, appeared rarely enough that specialized anti-tank weapons could be positioned to handle specific threats. The system worked because the battlefield conditions matched doctrinal assumptions. France, in 1944, presented different conditions. The Panther was not a specialized heavy tank deployed in small numbers. It was the German medium tank, produced in quantities that made it the most common armored opponent American forces faced. By September 19th, when 5th Panzer Army counterattacked at Arracourt, Panthers comprised the majority of German tank strength in the sector. The doctrinal response, relying on tank destroyers and combined arms, assumed that American medium tanks would not face enemy armor alone, but combat was not orderly. Engagements developed rapidly, often before supporting assets could be coordinated. The loading sequence specified in technical manuals reflected peacetime logic. High explosive first ensured tanks could immediately engage their most common targets: infantry positions, buildings, obstacles. Switching ammunition types required seconds, manageable in fluid situations where threats evolved gradually. But against Panthers at long range, those seconds meant death. A Sherman loader, upon identifying enemy armor, would need to traverse to the hull, storage bins, extract armor-piercing rounds, return to the breech, load, and allow the gunner to engage. During this interval, the Panther's gun, already loaded and oriented, would fire at 1,000 meters. German gunners, well-trained and equipped with superior optics, rarely missed. The tungsten shortage compounded the doctrinal paralysis. HVAP represented a strategic material, allocated carefully across multiple theaters and weapons systems. Ordnance planners viewed each round as precious. Guidance emphasized conservation. Use HVAP only when absolutely necessary. Exhaust standard ammunition first. This made administrative sense. It made no tactical sense. A tank destroyed in the first exchange of fire, because it loaded standard ammunition first, had conserved nothing. It had simply died efficiently. Crew-level adaptation preceded official recognition. Sergeants and corporals, the men whose survival depended on correct decisions, began making calculations that contradicted doctrine. If HVAP offered the only practical capability against German heavy armor at combat ranges, and if enemy heavy armor constituted the primary lethal threat, then HVAP should be loaded first. The logic was irrefutable, but it required ignoring technical manuals, disregarding ammunition conservation directives, and accepting personal responsibility for violating doctrine. Not all crews made this choice. Many followed official guidance, loading high explosive first, confident that the system would protect them through combined arms coordination. Others lacked HVAP entirely, making the question moot. But in units that possessed the tungsten rounds and faced Panthers regularly, informal doctrine emerged. Load HVAP first. Accept the reduced high explosive capability. Prioritize surviving the first engagement with enemy armor, because no amount of high explosive effectiveness mattered if the tank burned before firing a second round. This grassroots tactical revolution occurred without official sanction. No directive from Third Army authorized the change. No technical manual revision modified loading procedures. Instead, knowledge spread through the invisible networks that exist in combat units. Crews who survived Panther encounters shared what worked. Experienced sergeants told new crews how to load. The survival rate spoke for itself. Units that loaded HVAP first and engaged Panthers at maximum effective range maintained combat effectiveness. Units that followed Doctrine and attempted to close to short range suffered catastrophic losses. The stage was set at Arracourt for this unofficial doctrine to prove itself against the largest German armoured counterattack since Normandy. The fog was lifting, the Panthers were approaching, and in turrets across Combat Command A, loaders stood with tungsten-cored rounds already chambered, waiting to discover whether their unauthorized adaptation would validate itself through survival or condemn them for violating orders. The mathematics of armor penetration would provide the answer, written in burning steel across the fields of Lorraine. The M93 HVAP round measured precisely the same external dimensions as standard 76mm ammunition. The cartridge case, the overall length, the handling characteristics appeared identical to the loader, but internally, the round represented a fundamental departure from conventional armor-piercing design. The penetrator core consisted of tungsten carbide, a material with density nearly twice that of steel. This core measured only 19mm in diameter, substantially smaller than the 76mm bore. An aluminum jacket surrounded the tungsten, bringing the projectile to full bore diameter. A ballistic windshield capped the assembly, designed to separate after leaving the muzzle. The physics of penetration favored this configuration. Kinetic energy, the determinant of armor penetration, equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Velocity contributes exponentially. By reducing projectile weight through the aluminum jacket while maintaining propellant charge, muzzle velocity increased from 2,600 feet per second with standard ammunition to 3,400 feet per second with HVAP. This 800 foot per second increase translated to 63% more kinetic energy at the muzzle. At 1,000 yards, where velocity degraded substantially for both projectile types, HVAP retained approximately 40% more energy than standard rounds. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland during summer 1944 had established penetration values. Against homogeneous armor plate at 30 degrees obliquity, standard M62 armor-piercing rounds penetrated 4.3 inches at 1,000 yards. HVAP penetrated 7 inches at the same range and angle. This difference determined survivability. The Panther's turret mantlet, though curved and complex in geometry, averaged approximately 4.5 inches effective thickness at the gun mounting. Standard ammunition achieved marginal penetration at 100 yards. HVAP achieved reliable penetration beyond 1,000 yards. But tungsten carbide production capacity in the United States faced limitations that cascaded from strategic decisions made years earlier. The primary tungsten source was China, specifically the Hunan province mines. Japanese occupation of coastal China in 1937 through 1941 had disrupted supply chains. By 1944, tungsten imports arrived primarily through Burma and India, transported over the Himalayas by air. This supply line, though functional, could not meet demand. Domestic tungsten production from Colorado and Nevada mines supplied only 30% of wartime requirements. The remainder came from stockpiles accumulated before the war and from recovered material through recycling programs. Tungsten allocation involved competing priorities. Armor-piercing ammunition represented one demand. High-speed tool steel for manufacturing required tungsten. Electrical contacts needed it. Artillery shell production consumed quantities. The War Production Board, established in January 1942, adjudicated these competing claims. Tank ammunition received lower priority than bomber offensive armament and naval applications. The decision reflected strategic emphasis. Army Air Force's heavy bomber campaign against Germany consumed resources preferentially. Naval operations in the Pacific demanded specialized ammunition. For Sherman tank crews, these strategic calculations manifested as 3 to 5 HVAP rounds per tank. Some crews improvised methods to obtain more. Trading with tank destroyer units, which received priority allocation, sometimes yielded additional rounds. Friendly relationships with ordnance supply personnel occasionally resulted in informal redistribution, but most crews operated within the official allotment. 3 to 5 shots. After that, they reverted to standard ammunition, whose effectiveness against Panthers approached zero at combat ranges. The training pipeline for American tank crews in 1944 emphasized mechanical proficiency and basic gunnery. Fort Knox, Kentucky, served as the primary armor training center. The course lasted 17 weeks. Recruits learned to drive, maintain, and fight the Sherman. But the curriculum, established in 1942 and updated incrementally, did not address HVAP employment. The ammunition did not exist when the training program was designed. By the time HVAP reached production, the training establishment had not revised Doctrine to incorporate it. Crews learned to load high explosive first. They learned that armor-piercing ammunition came from hull storage when enemy armor appeared. They learned techniques that would kill them against Panthers. The disconnect between training and combat reality extended to gunnery instruction. Ranges at Fort Knox utilized targets representing known enemy vehicles, but the target array reflected 1942 intelligence. Panzer III and Panzer IV silhouettes predominated. Panther targets did not appear in training until late 1944, months after Panthers became the primary German medium tank in France. Crews trained to engage enemy armor at ranges under 500 yards, closing aggressively to ensure hits. Against Panthers, this doctrine guaranteed casualties. The training prepared men to fight the wrong war against the wrong enemy with the wrong tactics. The first Panther appeared at 08:15 hours, range approximately 1,200 meters, moving northwest along the road from Bézange toward Les Ayes. Corporal Mills, Denton's gunner, tracked the target through his telescopic sight. The Panthers' commander had not yet identified the American position. 4th Armored Division tanks occupied hull-down positions along a low ridge, partially concealed by morning fog remnants. The German tank moved with confidence characteristic of crews who believed themselves invulnerable to enemy fire at this range. Mills centered the reticle on the Panther's turret. The range exceeded doctrinal engagement distance by more than 700 yards. Standard procedure called for allowing the enemy to close, ensuring hits with standard ammunition, but Hartley had already loaded the HVAP round. Denton made the calculation instantly. At 1,200 meters, the Panther could fire effectively. His own tank could fire effectively only with HVAP. The geometry permitted no other choice. "Fire when ready," he ordered. The 76mm gun recoiled. The HVAP round crossed 1,200 meters in 1.4 seconds. It struck the Panther's mantlet slightly left of center. The tungsten penetrator, traveling at 2,900 feet per second at impact, defeated the armor and detonated the propellant charges, stored behind the gun breech. The Panther's turret erupted in flame. Secondary explosions followed as main gun ammunition cooked off. The entire engagement, from target identification to catastrophic kill, consumed 18 seconds. Similar engagements developed across Combat Command A's front within minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion engaged Panthers at ranges between 800 and 1,400 meters. Crews who had loaded HVAP first achieved kills in the opening exchange. Crews following Doctrine, attempting to close range before firing, absorbed hits before reaching effective distance for standard ammunition. The disparity in outcomes was immediate and measurable. By 0900 hours, Combat Command A had destroyed 14 Panthers. American losses totaled 2 tank destroyers and 3 Shermans. The exchange ratio, approximately 4-1 in American favor, contradicted every expectation based on technological comparison. German crews, skilled and experienced, fought from superior vehicles with better guns and armor. Yet they died in disproportionate numbers because American crews had adapted Doctrine before Doctrine adapted to them. The German tactical approach compounded their disadvantage. 5th Panzer Army attacked without adequate reconnaissance, advancing through fog toward American positions they had not properly identified. Poor coordination between panzer brigades meant attacks arrived piecemeal rather than as concentrated mass. But most significantly, German Doctrine assumed their armor provided immunity at ranges beyond 1,000 meters. Panther crews advanced confidently, expecting to engage at leisure from standoff distances. Instead, they encountered accurate fire that penetrated their mantlets before they could locate targets. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams observed the engagement from his command tank. Later that day, he reported to Combat Command A headquarters. The after-action report, filed September 19th at 1500 hours, documented the engagement with precision. 14 enemy tanks destroyed. Effective engagement ranges between 800 and 1500 yards. Primary ammunition, hypervelocity armor piercing. The report concluded with an observation that would influence ammunition doctrine for the remainder of the war. HVAP rounds, when available and loaded first, provide Sherman crews with effective capability against Panther tanks at normal combat ranges. Recommend priority allocation to tank battalions and authorization for first-round loading. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. General George Patton visited Combat Command A on September 20th. The 4th Armored Division was his favorite unit, and the Arracourt engagement represented exactly the aggressive armor action he advocated. But even Patton recognized the significance of what had occurred. In his diary that evening, he wrote, "Visited Wood's division today. His tankers are killing Panthers at ranges I did not believe possible for the 76mm gun. The new ammunition makes the difference. We need more of it." The entry captured the transformation. Technology mattered, tactics mattered, but ammunition selection, the decision of what to load first, mattered most. Over the following 11 days, the Battle of Arracourt validated the loading doctrine crews had adopted without authorization. 5th Panzer Army committed 2 Panzer brigades and elements of 2 Panzer divisions to the counteroffensive. German tank strength in the sector totaled 262 tanks and assault guns, predominantly Panthers and Panzer IV-H variants. Combat Command A defended with 163 tanks, mostly 75 and 76mm Shermans, supported by tank destroyers and artillery. The casualty figures told the story. By September 29th, when German offensive operations ceased, 5th Panzer Army had lost 200 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned. American losses totaled 48 Shermans, 49 light tanks, and several dozen tank destroyers. The exchange ratio, approximately 3-1 in American favor, occurred despite German technological superiority. Multiple factors contributed. American crews fought from prepared positions with superior intelligence. Tactical air support proved decisive, with P-47 fighter bombers destroying 73 German armored vehicles. Artillery coordination disrupted German assembly areas, but the tank-on-tank engagements revealed a pattern. Shermans, equipped with 76mm guns and HVAP ammunition, achieved kill rates against Panthers that exceeded predictions. Engagement ranges averaged between 800 and 1,200 yards. At these distances, HVAP could penetrate Panther turrets reliably. German crews, trained to expect immunity beyond 1,000 meters, found themselves vulnerable at ranges they considered safe. The psychological impact compounded the material effect. Panther crews became cautious, reluctant to expose themselves at distances where American fire proved lethal. The tactical adaptation spread through 3rd Army systematically. Units that received HVAP began loading it first. After-action reports documented the practice and its effectiveness. By October 1944, informal guidance circulated at battalion level. Load HVAP first when operating in areas with known Panther presence. The guidance remained unofficial, but it reflected reality. No formal doctrine revision appeared until December, but crews in contact with German armor had already adopted the new standard. The tungsten shortage meant the adaptation remained incomplete. Many Sherman battalions never received HVAP in meaningful quantities. The 761st Tank Battalion, a separate unit that entered combat in November 1944, received 3 rounds per tank. Other units received none. Priority allocation to tank destroyer battalions continued through the autumn, but where HVAP existed, crews used it first. The survival advantage was too significant to ignore. Statistical analysis conducted after the war quantified the impact. The Army Ballistic Research Laboratory examined armor-on-armor engagements from autumn 1944. Shermans, equipped with 76mm guns, achieved approximately 2.6 kills per loss against Panthers when using standard ammunition exclusively. The same Shermans achieved 4.1 kills per loss when employing HVAP for initial engagements. The difference represented the value of first-round effectiveness. Crews that could penetrate enemy armor in the opening exchange survived to continue fighting. Crews that could not often died before achieving killing range. The Arracourt engagement also demonstrated the importance of combined arms coordination. Shermans alone did not defeat 5th Panzer Army. Artillery, air support, tank destroyers, and infantry all contributed. But within the tank versus tank subset of the battle, the ammunition loading decision proved determinant. German after-action reports, captured later, noted American long-range accuracy against Panther mantlets with surprise and concern. One report from 113th Panzer Brigade, dated September 23, stated, "Enemy Sherman tanks engage our Panthers at ranges previously considered safe. Turret penetrations occur regularly beyond 1,000 meters. Ammunition type unknown, but effects suggest tungsten-cored projectiles." The German assessment was correct. The effects did suggest tungsten-cored projectiles because they were tungsten-cored projectiles loaded first and fired first by crews who had calculated that survival required violating doctrine. What began as individual decisions by sergeants and corporals became, through the brutal validation of combat, the foundation for revised doctrine. The manual would change. Official guidance would eventually align with battlefield practice, but at Arracourt, in September 1944, the men who loaded HVAP first did so without permission and without certainty that their choice was correct. They had only mathematics, logic, and the knowledge that the alternative was dying efficiently while following orders. Combat Command A remained in defensive positions around Arracourt through early October 1944. The German counter-offensive had failed catastrophically. 5th Panzer Army withdrew to regroup, having lost 3/4 of its armoured strength without achieving any strategic objective. 4th Armoured Division transitioned to Corps Reserve on October 12, replaced by the 26th Infantry Division. The tankers who had held Arracourt moved into rest areas for maintenance and refitting. They carried with them lessons written in burning Panthers across the fields of Lorraine. Staff Sergeant Denton and his crew survived the battle without casualties. Their Sherman, one of the handful equipped with both the 76mm gun and a meaningful HVAP allocation, destroyed 4 Panthers over 11 days of fighting. Each engagement followed the pattern established on September 19th. HVAP loaded first. Target acquisition at ranges between 800 and 1,300 meters. First round fired for effect. The tungsten penetrator defeated Panther turret armor reliably within this engagement envelope. After expending their 5 HVAP rounds, Denton's crew reverted to standard ammunition and adjusted tactics accordingly, avoiding long-range engagements and seeking flank shots. The tactical adaptation they had pioneered spread through informal channels more rapidly than official doctrine could propagate. Tank commanders talked to other tank commanders. Loaders compared notes. The mathematics were irrefutable. Units that loaded, HVAP first suffered fewer casualties and achieved better kill ratios. By November, the practice had become standard throughout Third Army's armoured units, though still without formal authorization. Crews simply understood that survival required prioritizing the ammunition that could defeat German heavy armor at combat ranges. Official doctrine revision came in December 1944, prompted by the German Ardennes offensive. The Battle of the Bulge demonstrated conclusively that German armor remained a significant threat, and that American medium tanks needed every advantage available. On December 29, 12 days after the German breakthrough, First Army issued tactical guidance explicitly authorizing HVAP as the primary loaded round in Sherman tanks operating in areas with expected Panther or Tiger presence. The guidance represented formal recognition of what crews had been doing for months, but it carried weight. Unit commanders could no longer discipline crews for violating loading doctrine because the doctrine now matched battlefield practice. The tungsten shortage persisted through the war's end. Total HVAP production for the 76mm gun reached approximately 24,000 rounds by May 1945. This quantity equipped the entire 9th Army with roughly 5 rounds per tank. Other armies received less. The scarcity meant that even with revised doctrine, many crews fought without HVAP or with allocations too small to provide meaningful capability. The adaptation that Denton and others pioneered remained relevant only for those fortunate enough to receive the ammunition. For Corporal Hartley, the loader who had first placed HVAP in the breach against doctrine, the validation came without recognition or commendation. No medal citation mentioned his decision. No official report credited him with tactical innovation. He had simply done what seemed necessary to survive, and he had survived. In February 1945, 4th Armoured Division participated in the drive across the Rhine. Hartley loaded HVAP first in every engagement with German armour. By then, it was doctrine. No one questioned the practice. The revolution had been absorbed into routine. Third Army's after-action analysis, compiled in spring 1945, dedicated 2 paragraphs to ammunition employment in armoured engagements. The analysis noted that crews employing HVAP as first-loaded ammunition achieved superior results against German heavy armour compared to crews following pre-war loading doctrine. The conclusion recommended continued priority for HVAP production and distribution to tank battalions. The recommendation was bureaucratic, measured, unremarkable. It mentioned no names. It described the outcome without acknowledging the unauthorized decisions that had produced it. The truth had proven itself through blood and burning steel. The recognition came as a footnote in a logistics report, Part 8. The broader implications, 600 words. The transformation of ammunition loading doctrine at Arracourt represented a microcosm of adaptation throughout the American military in Europe during 1944 and 1945. The pattern repeated across domains. Official doctrine, developed before contact with improved German equipment, proved inadequate. Combat units adapted informally. Individual leaders made decisions that contradicted training and regulation. Survival validated these decisions. Eventually, formal doctrine caught up with battlefield reality, but the interval between informal adaptation and official recognition cost lives. The broader historical significance of Arracourt and similar engagements emerged only in retrospect. The American military's ability to adapt doctrine rapidly, to incorporate lessons from combat without rigid adherence to pre-war theory, contributed substantially to victory in Europe. Other factors mattered more. Industrial production overwhelmed. German manufacturing capacity. Strategic bombing degraded German infrastructure. Soviet offensives in the east consumed the majority of Wehrmacht strength, but at the tactical level, where individual crews faced individual Panthers across French fields, the willingness to trust experience over doctrine made survival possible. The HVAP ammunition that enabled this adaptation never received the recognition accorded to other weapons systems. No propaganda films celebrated the tungsten-cored penetrator. No patriotic posters showed loaders handling the distinctive rounds. The scarcity meant most tankers never fired HVAP. Those who did often exhausted their allocation in the first engagement. The ammunition was simply too rare to become iconic. Yet for the crews who possessed it and knew how to employ it, HVAP represented the difference between fighting Panthers effectively and dying while trying. Post-war ammunition development reflected lessons learned about kinetic energy penetration. The development of armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, which dominated Cold War tank ammunition, traced directly to the HVAP experience. The principle remained identical. Use a subcaliber penetrator surrounded by a lightweight sabot to achieve maximum velocity and thus maximum penetration. Modern tank ammunition operates at even higher velocities with even denser penetrator materials, but the fundamental concept originated in the tungsten rounds that American loaders first chambered in Sherman guns during autumn 1944. The men who made the decision to violate Doctrine did not do so believing they were shaping the future of armored warfare. They did so believing they needed to survive the next engagement. This distinction matters. Military innovation often occurs not through systematic research and development, but through desperate adaptation under fire. The refinement comes later. The institutional learning happens afterward. But the initial breakthrough comes from individuals calculating that the approved method will get them killed and choosing survival over compliance. Staff Sergeant Denton returned to Texas in October 1945. He worked as a mechanic, raised a family, rarely spoke about the war. When he did discuss his service, he talked about the crew, the reliability of the Sherman's engine, the quality of American logistics. He did not talk about loading HVAP first because he did not think of it as significant. It was simply what you did if you wanted to live long enough to go home. The tactical revolution he participated in was, from his perspective, merely common sense applied under pressure. That soldiers facing death make rational decisions to improve their survival odds should surprise no one. That these individual rational decisions accumulated into doctrinal transformation is the less obvious lesson, the one that emerges only when examining thousands of small choices made across hundreds of units over months of combat. The first duty of a tank crew was to survive long enough to accomplish the mission. Everything else followed from that principle. Loading HVAP first when fighting Panthers was not reckless. It was not innovative. It was not even particularly brave. It was simply correct. The manual would eventually say so. But at Arracourt, in September 1944, the crews who loaded tungsten first did so without the manual's permission. They had only mathematics, experience, and the knowledge that German armor would not wait for doctrine to catch up with reality. They loaded HVAP first. They fired at 1,000 yards. They survived. The rest is footnotes in logistics reports and paragraphs in after-action analyses, and a story about how sometimes the most important decisions are made by sergeants in turrets who understand that survival requires ignoring instructions that will get them killed. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.